Welcome to State of Mind, being human and living well.
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 I'm your host, Deborah Sloss, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I use she, her pronouns. Today, we're talking about a stage of life that affects more than half the population, perimenopause and menopause, and how the accompanying hormonal shifts can impact mental health. These changes can trigger anxiety, depression, irritability, and brain fog, and can affect our relationships, work, and our sense of self. Yet many women experience this stage in isolation, feeling misunderstood or stigmatized, and the mental health effects are often overlooked or misdiagnosed. Recent research from the University of Virginia Health System shows that many women begin experiencing significant symptoms far earlier than menopause is commonly discussed. More than half of women ages 30 to 35 report symptoms rated as moderate or severe, and that number rises to nearly 2/3 by ages 36 to 40. Yet despite the prevalence and impact, most women won't seek treatment for menopause symptoms until well into their 50s. This episode is particularly personal for me. My journey through perimenopause began in my early 40s, and I experienced many unexpected symptoms, particularly a full-body type of anxiety that I had never experienced before. While I of course knew about menopause and its related symptoms, I didn't expect to face this or even think about it for another 10 years. And yet my perimenopausal symptoms were profoundly impactful at a time when I was working and raising 3 young children, and they lasted for more than 10 years, a duration that actually is not uncommon. This was nearly 20 years ago, and at the time, perimenopause wasn't widely discussed, and I barely understood what it was or how it could impact someone's life. That's why I'm so glad to be joined today by our guests, who will share personal and professional experiences to bring this important information to our listeners. Joining us is Helen Bennett, a BACP accredited psychotherapist and counselor, clinical supervisor, and EMCC accredited coach based near London, England. She has a private practice specializing in supporting clients experiencing challenging menopause, hormone, or fertility issues. Helen has lived with primary ovarian insufficiency, also known as POI, for nearly 2 decades and is passionate about raising awareness of POI, early menopause, and the impact of hormone changes on mental and physical health. Also joining us is Liz Ryan, a 43-year-old landscape designer from Santa Cruz, California, where she lives with her husband, 2 children, and their family dog. She entered perimenopause earlier than usual, before many of her peers, and found herself navigating unfamiliar symptoms without much support. Her journey, both challenging and illuminating, underscores the importance of women sharing their stories and resources. Liz believes that by speaking openly about this transition, women can better support and empower one another through this challenging season of life. Welcome to State of Mind, Helen and Liz. I'm so glad you're both here with us today.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm just delighted to be here too.
Helen, let's start with you. Why are hormones so impactful to every aspect of a woman's life?
Hormones are our messengers in the body. We often think of them as related to menstrual cycles for women, but they're also related to how we feel, the messages that are sent from our brain to different parts of our body. And they're really integral to growth, to change, to how we develop as humans throughout our lifetime. So we often think about hormones and female hormones to do with reproduction, but actually the impact of estrogen and progesterone and testosterone also on our body, our functions, how our body works, our mood, our mental health are huge. So every woman will go through menopause at some point in their life, and those assigned female at birth, but it's different for everyone, and the symptoms are different for everybody, and often the impact of the menopause can be really overlooked, and it can be very difficult to get it diagnosed and know that that's what's happening to you.
Can you give us some idea about how many women experience symptoms related to perimenopause and menopause, and when are those likely to begin for women?
Well, I would say that every woman experiences symptoms of menopause and perimenopause. It's just that it's very varied as to when it starts and when it ends. So typically, we say that perimenopause lasts approximately 4 years, but in my experience, for many women, it can last decades. It can last much longer than that. And it's only often after menopause has been diagnosed and we know that it's happened that people look back and realize quite how early their symptoms lasted and what might have been happening much earlier in their life. So the average age of menopause in the United States and in the Western world is 51. And perimenopause, if we think that it's often 4 to 10 years, maybe 4 to 12 years previously, that means that most people will be starting menopause before the age of 45. And so it's something that often we think about as happening to women in their 50s, yet the reality is that it's happening to women in their 30s and 40s.
Who are in the midst of raising families and the sort of height of their careers and complicated parts of their life.
Absolutely. And often they may be on hormonal contraceptives, which may be masking their symptoms, or they may be having certain treatments or lifestyle changes that they think are associated with their symptoms and what they have. And there's this vast range of symptoms that somebody might experience to do with menopause. There's at least 43, and I think I can probably count more if I, depending on how detailed I am about those symptoms. And so often they may present at their primary care physician or their GP with anxiety or with mental health changes that are just assumed to be the stresses and strains of modern life, whereas actually often it's linked to estrogen. And it's only when they have enough symptoms or some other reason to investigate their bloods, perhaps, that it is diagnosed, or within fertility treatment if they're trying to have babies. And then they realize that something's not right.
And we'll get into those symptoms a little more later in the show. Since every woman, more than half our population, will go through menopause, why do you think we don't talk about it more openly, especially given its impact on mental and physical health?
It's traditionally been seen as an old lady's disease, so something that happens to old people. And I think the stigma and shame around that has been huge because we are a culture and society that prioritizes youth, prioritizes beauty, prioritizes fertility. And so for women to realize that they are entering a different stage of life can be very difficult, particularly if they haven't reached some milestones that they'd hoped to reach in their life, particularly perhaps having children or reaching other things that they'd wanted to do by the time they reach the age that they perceive to be menopause, which kind of, as I mentioned earlier, is often much later than the reality of when menopause actually hits. I've worked with people in their 50s who think that they're early for menopause, and I kind of end up psychoeducating to describe actually what the reality is, because the way that we talk about it culturally is something that happens to women when their children have left home, if they have children, or when they have finished perhaps working. It's something that people associate with retirement. Yet in reality, that's just not true. It's something that women are navigating alongside all of the stresses and strains of life. There's also been a real lack of research into women's health across the board, and especially into hormones, because our hormones are tricky. And also, much research is done on men and men's bodies because they don't have the fluctuations of hormones that women have. And so, women's hormones, I think, have been traditionally seen in medical research as something just a bit messy and something perhaps to be controlled through hormonal contraceptives or to do with cancer treatments and things, rather than something that we really need to understand the fluctuations and how they impact people. So the lack of research means that there's not enough knowledge. And so when women do notice their symptoms and go seek support, it's often not recognised. And so it can take years for somebody to understand that what they're going through is menopause.
Thank you so much for that. Now, I want to turn to Liz, who's here to share about her personal experience navigating perimenopause. Liz, when and how did you first notice things were changing for you? And did you understand those to be hormonal changes right away, or did it take some time to come to that realization?
I mean, yeah, I relate to so much of what Helen just said because it is very like nebulous and vague of what we're going through. I think the first big hormonal shift for me was when I stopped nursing my second child around the age of 2. I decided I wanted to stop nursing around his age of 2. I decided I wanted to stop nursing him, and I did. And that kind of dropped me into, I want to call it kind of like a postpartum depression sort of thing. Like I just felt like this cloud of downness and negativity kind of descended from nowhere. And then that kind of subsided, the depression part, but I never really felt like I got back to sort of the hormone feeling or hormone balance that I had before that. And so I sort of kind of, struggled on for a handful of years, went to my OB and explained some of the symptoms I was having. And they were more like more stress and anxiety, mood changes, things like that, where I kind of felt I was pretty great and happy and good about 2 weeks out of the month. And then the other 2 weeks, I felt this sort of like negativity goggles came down over my eyes and brain, and I just saw the world in a more negative light. Everything was harder. Things that wouldn't normally bother me bothered me a lot. Didn't have as much patience for my kids and my husband and things like that. And when I went to my OB for that, it was kind of like, well, we can put you on antidepressants or birth control. And I just felt like that those two options weren't really attractive to me. I tried acupuncture and herbs and all sorts of things. And I think the thing that helped me the most was like routine exercise. I've always been an athlete, and I think that just helped me kind of de-stress and balance a little bit. But it didn't really like revolutionize anything. And then the years went on, and around like 39, 40, really it started ramping up. So I started getting hot flashes like every 20 minutes, and it would keep me up at night. It was like all of a sudden I had these very like stereotypical perimenopause symptoms. I started getting like deep anxiety. Like I would feel physical anxiety as well as mental anxiety. I almost described it as my body felt hot with hormones. Like it just felt like my skin was crawling with anxiety. Trouble sleeping. I never experienced trouble sleeping in my whole life. And all of a sudden, I'm waking up and ruminating every night and, can't get back to sleep. And then what really, really ramped it up for me was brain fog. And I am a landscape designer, very creative job where I have to be really present with my clients and really present with the project managers and stuff. And I would lose my train of thought. I wouldn't be able to organize my day as well. And I've always prided myself on being a very organized, clear speaker. And it just like went out the window. Like I felt like I was almost like losing my identity and losing my ability to do my job, which I love my job and I want to keep doing it. But I was like, maybe I need to do something else because so many people are relying on me and I can't clearly articulate what I want to say or clearly plan what I want to do. And that was becoming a problem. And I felt kind of overwhelmed by my stage in life, busy career, growing kids, and then during this same time, my husband and I turning into our 40s. And that's always kind of, I feel like, a stressful time in marriage, lots of shifting and changing. So it was all wrapped up in this really stressful season of life. So it was hard for me to navigate like, okay, what's just like the stress of life and what's hormones, it was hard to tease it all out. And then I went to this integrative medicine clinic here in Santa Cruz and found a doctor that would actually take time with me and talk to me. And we did a bunch of blood tests, and we did this really interesting urine test where I would pee on a stick every day. And so it really showed like, the trajectory of my hormones. And that showed that I was perimenopausal. But even then, like it was more just like, here are these herbs to take, here's this. No one ever mentioned HRT or anything like that.
Can you define what HRT is for our listeners?
Oh, yeah, hormone replacement therapy. And so just through actually being on Instagram and listening to other podcasts, I heard about hormone replacement therapy, and then I heard about this organization called MIDI, and it's just a telehealth organization that specializes in perimenopause and menopause treatment. And I booked a telehealth appointment with them, and they said, "Sounds like you should try HRT." And they ordered some prescriptions for me, and I started taking them, and like it revolutionized my life. Like brain fog left, hot flashes left. It's not perfect, but my anxiety is like at a minimum, like so much better. So it was a journey, but I got there. There was no roadmap, and I had to really go through a lot of trials and tribulations to get there. So, and it's not even perfect yet, but it's livable, it's doable. So,
It does. It sounds like it took so much persistence on your part to actually get to a kind of help that made a difference for you. I'm wondering if you could talk some about the impact on your work life and your confidence in your own career, during that time, and also in yourself. Like what were those impacts?
yeah, I mean, I think, it's sort of like the vicious cycle of these symptoms impacting my self-esteem or sense of myself, impacting my confidence at work, and that all just being kind of a cycle, a loop. And then just like my ability to think linearly and clearly really affected my job. I have a really busy job. That has I mean, we all have busy jobs, but I have part of my job is creative. So I need to have space to be creative, and that has a certain energy connected to it. And then I have to be very analytical and scheduled and organized because we're doing projects that are long projects over time that involve a lot of different people, clients, project managers, subcontractors, all that kind of stuff. And so my ability to be creative, but also balance that with my analytical mind is what makes me good at my job. And that was really kind of falling apart. It felt like I couldn't, articulate my thoughts to the team, to clients, to my associates, things like that. So and then that in turn affected my self-esteem. And then that, in turn affected my ability to show up for everybody that relies on me. So, yeah, it was hard.
And I know when I was talking to you about coming on the show, you even mentioned that you were considering leaving your career. Can you talk some about that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely came into my mind of like, maybe I'm not able to do this anymore. Like maybe I'm just going into this. It was kind of like what's happened to me, like losing my identity a little bit because like I was saying before, I always prided myself on being clear-minded and articulate and organized, and that seemed to be slipping away from me. And I didn't really, I mean, I thought maybe it could be hormonal, but it was so new that I was like, what is this? Am I just losing my edge? Like, am I just losing my abilities to do this? And yeah, and that affected my sense of identity because I do identify myself as a landscape designer. I've been that for 20 years and ran my own company and all that stuff. So it was very much tied to my identity. So yeah, it was not enjoyable.
You're listening to State of Mind, Being Human and Living Well. I'm your host, Deborah Sloss. Today, we're looking at how hormonal changes during perimenopause and menopause affect mental health, shifts that can bring anxiety, depression, irritability, and brain fog, often impacting our relationships, work, and identity. We've been hearing from Liz Ryan about navigating early perimenopause while raising young children and managing a demanding career. Psychotherapist Helen Bennett, joining us from England, has been helping us understand how these hormonal changes affect mood, and resilience, and why so many women feel isolated or misunderstood during this phase of life. If you're just tuning in, you may want to go back and hear Liz's story and Helen's insights. Coming up, we'll explore what helped Liz cope, along with strategies and supports for women facing similar challenges. Back to our interview. Helen, what's your reaction to what Liz just shared? Is this a story you hear often in your practice? I saw your head nodding as she was talking. I'm guessing that's true.
Yes, absolutely. It's very familiar, this story. And I think it's very common for women in menopause to be experiencing all of these changes. It really struck me, Liz, when you were talking about this feeling of loss of skill set that you identified so much with, and how destabilizing that must have been. And I think this is really a case in point of what happens when our hormones shift and also fluctuate, which makes it confusing because they're moving and they're changing, and particularly in those perimenopause years. And it can mean that we really lose our sense of self. We wonder who we are. We lose our identity. We don't really understand what sort of a person we are when we're reacting to things in ways that we don't normally react to before, with that irritability and that anger, with the loss of capacity that you were describing around parenting and being able to be present with your kids. And it's not that you don't want to be, it's just that you can't. But yes, Deborah, it definitely is a story that I hear a lot. People often say to me, I felt like I was going mad, and people experience such great brain fog that they feel scared that they may have early onset dementia, because it's often so destabilizing. And I spot it in people that I just see in everyday life as well as my clients, when a woman particularly is searching for a word, and there's a particular way that they do it in perimenopause that you can just tell, you can see, because these words that are really common standard words that you wouldn't even think about forgetting or using at other points in your life, they just you can't quite grab them, you can't quite touch them. And that, when you're working, when you're perhaps having to stand up in front of people and present, or you're having to give clear direction to people, as Liz was describing she needs to in her job, to suddenly find that you aren't articulate anymore is just impacts your confidence so badly. It's so destabilizing. So yes, a very familiar story.
I really noticed, in my age bracket, which is, 20 years down the road, there is a little more permission for that. It's like, oh, it's kind of expected. But I think in those younger years, it's not expected. And so it's embarrassing. And people are like, what is going on with you? That's not well understood.
Yeah, especially women who are working, because I know from my own experience, I had a lot of brain fog and I wrote everything down because I was so terrified of forgetting something or not being able to capture a bit of information that I knew I'd heard. And it's almost painful when you're trying to squeeze your brain to find the word or the point or the thing that you said you'd do that then you can't remember straight after a meeting. So it can be really difficult.
Yeah, I remember having to totally shift the way I remembered things or did, because before I could just remember stuff. Like I didn't have to write as much down. So I had to change the systems with how I scheduled things or did things or wrote things down. Like it totally shifted the way I structured the system of how I actually usually did things, because I had to put more notes down or more timelines together and things like that so I wouldn't forget things.
I'm just wondering, Helen, if you could just give a run through maybe of some of the symptoms that Liz didn't mention, particularly ones people don't expect or might not generally associate with hormone changes of perimenopause and menopause.
Sure. I mean, we've talked a bit about the mental health symptoms, and there's a lot more as well that people experience to do with the concentration and the inability to concentrate, maybe panic attacks, reduced self-esteem, which I think you mentioned, Liz. There's an increase in body-focused repetitive behaviors that people often experience as a way to regulate. So that might be skin picking or nail picking or hair pulling that a lot of women struggle to get a handle on and manage. There is an increase in body dysmorphia, disordered eating. And that can sometimes be linked to a physical symptom, which is weight gain or body shape changes, which happen to a lot of women at this stage. We struggle, and any physical symptom that is linked to the stress that we're feeling. So women will often grind their teeth more at night or clench their jaws because it's just a way of regulating or trying to kind of help their body. The lack of motivation, a lot of women report just not having any interest in things anymore that used to interest them, and how difficult that is, particularly as you were describing, Liz, when you've got a young family and you're really struggling to perhaps play with them, or you're struggling to join them for things that they used to expect you to join them for. And these feelings of dread, and often people report waking up with paranoia. We've talked a bit about the quality of the anxiety, which is often different and could be, again, very difficult and destabilizing for somebody who hasn't experienced anxiety before, because you think, who is this? I've not felt like this before. And those people who have experienced anxiety before will often find there's a real increase in their anxiety, or a different quality to their anxiety, which can be very difficult to manage. Crying spells, emotional ability, your tears are so close to the surface, your anger's so close to the surface. It can be much harder to manage your emotions, perhaps in work meetings, or perhaps when in conversations with your children or your partners. That emotional ability, that difficulty to regulate and manage your emotions, can be scary. And often women describe it as the rage, kind of like a volcano. It just vumps up and there's no stopping it, even if normally you would have been able to stop it before. And that's terrifying if that's not you and that's not how you associate your emotions to be.
Right. No one wants to feel out of control of themselves.
No, and I think that's really difficult, and particularly in the roles that women have in society and the roles that women have as mothers, we're really expected to keep a lid on our anger. The angry, emotional woman can have such an impact on work, whereas, in gender roles in society, often a man can be seen as passionate, but a woman can be seen as unstable if she displays her anger in the way that women often feel that they need to be, that comes out of them during menopause. And of course, there's the physical symptoms as well. So there are many that people will be able to find out if you Google menopause symptoms, the most obvious ones like the hot flashes and the insomnia. But there are many that we don't always think about, like body odor changes or loss of strength, sarcopenia, when your muscles can really reduce very quickly. Perhaps dry eyes or tinnitus are things that people wouldn't necessarily associate with menopause, and bloating and vertigo, pins and needles, all of these different things that can suddenly happen to somebody which you wouldn't necessarily associate with a loss of estrogen.
Thank you. Yeah, those are really surprising to hear. So, Helen, can you also talk some about how these hormone changes can ripple out to impact people's relationships, their work, and their daily life?
Yes, of course. So I see this a lot, that the impact of the menopause can have on families and family systems. One of the reasons I went into this was when I was working in a generalist agency supporting people with different counselling and psychotherapy issues, how I noticed that the menopause was impacting men that I worked with. It was impacting young people who I worked with, because there was always, it was impacting women as well, obviously, but it was something that was impacting so many different parts of a family, because they didn't understand why perhaps somebody was behaving, a mother was behaving how she was behaving, or a wife was having some emotional breakdowns, or was having the experiencing some of the symptoms which they didn't understand. And when I had this light bulb moment, when I realized how much menopause was impacting everybody, I realized that it was a big thing that we need to look at and we need to understand better. And when we ask about work, it's astonishing actually how menopause impacts people in the workplace. As I mentioned earlier, when it's impacted, perimenopause is impacting women in their 30s and 40s. The statistics show that 6% of women leave their jobs because of the menopause, and 1 in 6 are considering it. And people are like twice as likely to consider leaving if they feel unsupported by their employer or manager, and twice as likely to say their menopause symptoms have had a negative impact on their career. We often talk about the glass ceiling for women in employment, and I've often wondered, since I've started this area of work, how much that's linked to women's health, and how much they're struggling alone and at work.
Yeah, I work in a male dominated field, and all the people that I report to are men, and I'm usually very open about what's going on with me, but I cannot talk to them about this. Like, I don't feel comfortable doing that. But there should be something for this because it's something, it's almost like being pregnant. Like it's something that affects your work and your ability to show up for work so drastically that I should have a venue to be able to be like, I'm going through this health problem. But if I had cancer, I could talk to them about it. If I was pregnant or if something else, like if I broke my leg or something, but this is a health thing or a mental health and a physical health thing that I feel like I can't talk about that with my male supervisor.
That's so common. The research that I'd read said that 45% of women say they feel their menopause symptoms have had a negative impact on their work, and 47% have needed to take a day off work due to menopause symptoms, but they wouldn't tell their employer the reason why.
Helen, I want to come back to you with one more question about what are some of the most common misconceptions people have about perimenopause and menopause?
The most common that I come across is age. The average age of menopause in the Western world, the US and the UK, is 51, and perimenopause can last anything up to 12 years plus before that. And so it's actually very common to experience menopause in your 40s. And let's be clear about what menopause is. Menopause is one specific day. It's the day that has been exactly a year after your last menstrual period. So if you've had a year without any periods, then it's said that you're in menopause. And then anything after that is postmenopause. Anything before that in the fluctuating hormone part of the transition is perimenopause. And before that is premenopause, when you're having regular menstrual cycles and no hormone fluctuations to do with the menopause transition. So while the average age is 51, early menopause is experiencing menopause before 45. And then there's a condition called premature ovarian insufficiency, which is menopause before 40. And this can happen anytime from puberty. It can be diagnosed. So I work with people who experienced finding out that they weren't going to have periods. Perhaps their ovaries hadn't developed really early on in their teens and have been managing that through their adulthood, as well as people who are diagnosed with POI, perhaps in their 30s after they've had children. And it's a very different experience depending on when you have it. But those women's stories are often not understood. 1 in 100 women experiences a natural early menopause before 40, 1 in 1,000 before 30. And that's just natural spontaneous menopause, as we call it, which is when the ovaries stop working or stop working consistently. And then you can have people who've experienced cancer treatment, who've experienced, perhaps they've chosen to have chemical menopause to cope with really debilitating symptoms like those of PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And so there are many more people who experience this than we understand. And so the amount of times that I've experienced or people I've worked with have experienced people sort of shrugging their shoulders and saying you're too young, whether it's doctors, whether it's you describe a hot flash and somebody says, oh, you're too young for that. I've been told I'm too young to be on HRT. You're constantly having your experience questioned, and that's very difficult. And it also means that there's more of a stigma and there's more of a lack of understanding about what's happening to you if you're experiencing those symptoms at a younger age.
Liz, when you began to recognize what was happening, what actually helped you start to feel better and more in control of your life?
Gosh, I it took a while for me to start feeling better and feeling more in control. I think for me, just personally, what helps me feel more in control when I am going through anything that's tough is doing something. So, like, trying to figure it out, trying to do something about it. I think that's why I was able to sort of like advocate for myself and go all these different routes and try different things. I also recognize that I'm a affluent white woman, so I have this power to be able to like access all these things and try all these different things and the time to be the freedom to like take off work and go to all these resources. So it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be so hard to figure this out. But um, I think exercise was a big thing for me, just like routine exercise. I work out 3, 4 times a week. I have my days scheduled. For me, that was what kept me sane and what kept me like at a reasonable amount of balance. It was also like me time. it was a time where I could go to this workout and people would tell me what to do. I didn't have to make any decisions. I just had to show up and do what they told me to do. And that was a really nice thing to have. It was going to the integrative medicine clinic was really helpful because I felt like someone was actually listening to me and providing options of things to try that were outside of just antidepressants and birth control. So I felt like I had someone in my corner. Therapy was also really helpful. That was helpful in like teasing out what was the hormone stuff and what was life stuff and what was marriage stuff, and then just having someone that would validate me and hear me and all that kind of stuff.
Looking back, what kind of support, whether from family, friends, or colleagues, really made a difference for you?
My husband was, he's very supportive. He has a chronic illness. He has a autoimmune disease, and so he's been on, all sorts of crazy medications that have made him feel certain ways. Um, and so he kind of, in a weird way, understands what it's like to have hormone fluctuations. He was on steroids for a long time, and that gave him a lot of interesting symptoms that are almost similar to like PMS symptoms or perimenopause symptoms. So he has a weird insight into how this stuff can make you feel. And he is a very involved partner. He doesn't see my role as taking care of the kids solely. We're very cooperative in that way. And so we were able to figure out like, and it's not perfect, but we were able to figure out ways for me to express to him, like, I'm having a really hard time. It's not about any of you, but I need to go and like take some space. And he is like, yes, go do that. I got it. I got it. So he's been really good at understanding when I need space and trying to understand that it's not about him. So he's been really supportive that way. And it's been good because it's forced us to have to communicate about this stuff. And it's been tricky and we've bumbled through it and it works for the most part. But yeah. So he supported me. I feel like friends have always supported me, talking to them, sharing with them. And they're kind of like, oh, it's nice to know like what's coming our way and that like you're going through it and you can help us navigate it when we're going through it. So yeah, I feel like my community, my husband have really supported me through all this. Yeah.
You're listening to State of Mind, Being Human and Living Well. I'm your host, Deborah Sloss. Today, we've been hearing Liz Ryan's story of navigating early perimenopause while raising children and pursuing her career, along with expert insights from psychotherapist Helen Bennett on how hormonal changes can affect mental health, relationships, and daily life. Next, we hear from Casey, Liz's husband and partner, who shares his perspective on their journey through this challenging and transformative time of life.
As a partner of someone who has struggled with perimenopause, I think there's been a few things that have really helped me. As I see my partner, I've seen how differently and dramatically perimenopause has impacted her. It mostly really leaves me with a feeling of sympathy and kind of fills me with a desire to really support and be there for her. It's something I know as a husband, I can't fix it, but I can be present and supportive. I also know it can be really hard for me living with the unpredictability and the irritability, but I think I mostly have the dominant feeling that I see her sometimes really struggling with it, whether it's the very intense sort of surges of negative self-talk or really overwhelming anxiety. And I see that as tough. And I don't want my wife to feel alone in that struggle. And I really want to support her. So that's something, those feelings help me be supportive. But I think there's also something that's been tricky in our relationship is how to address and acknowledge that even though she clearly is having a much rougher time, the perimenopause impacts our family. It impacts our kids, and it impacts me personally too. And so we're working on how to communicate around that, but that's certainly been a challenge. So I'm really happy that you're doing this program and you're shedding more light and info and education on this, and hoping that this moves things forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Casey. And now, back to our interview. Helen, how can therapy, lifestyle changes, or simple self-care strategies help women manage mental health symptoms during menopause and perimenopause?
Of course, therapy can provide a confidential space to talk about some of these things, somewhere where you're not going to be judged, where you're going to be listened to, which can be very difficult, as you said, with the stigma that can sometimes happen, particularly if you don't have a supportive friendship group or partner to talk this through, or you don't know what's going on. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is the proven talking therapy to help insomnia and hot flashes. There's been lots of research around that. I find that when I use CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, with clients, it's often the psychoeducation that's a really useful part of it, to really understand what's happening during a hot flash with your thermoregulation that you're having, and how your body's responding to it, and being able to talk yourself through it to reduce its severity can be really empowering, because you can't stop the hot flash happening, but you can stop how you feel about it or change how you feel about it. So psychoeducation around that, around understanding what's happening in my body, why is my body doing this, and why am I struggling, can help a lot of the symptoms and reduce their impact. And sleep hygiene, understanding about the importance of sleep. As you mentioned, HRT the hormone replacement therapy, particularly the progesterone element, can really make a difference to sleep, and so that can help make a difference. So the hormone therapy can really change things, can make a lot of difference. I would say it's not a silver bullet. It's often something that can be very difficult to manage. It can have lots of side effects, and so I think sometimes, particularly in the UK, there's a lot of kind of talk about just slap on a patch and you'll feel amazing. And yes, to some extent, if your estrogen and progesterone has been very low and things have been fluctuating a lot, it can help immediately. It can take a while for the hormones to build up and then feel any benefit. But a lot of people have to chop and change how they're taking hormones, because perhaps their skin doesn't like the patches, or they react somehow, or they get different side effects that don't suit them. But there are lots of options out there. So there are lots of different things that you can try.
I'm wondering if there are particular strategies you see partners or family members employing that are especially helpful.
Absolutely. I think when partners and family members educate themselves on perimenopause and the menopause transition and what's happening for their loved one, that can make a huge difference to the experience in the home. Being able to share what's happening, being able to take time out if you need it to cope, to perhaps manage those regulation activities that you need, and do that without guilt, is hugely important, because we need to treat menopause and the menopause transition and any mental health, whether physical or mental health symptoms, as something that needs support. It's not just something to just manage and pretend isn't happening, because as we know, that can come back and bite us later on. So it's about looking after your health and getting that support to do that with families.
And how does stigma influence how quickly women are likely to access care for perimenopause and menopause?
So, firstly, lots of women, because of stigma, don't understand what's happening to them. They think of it as something that happens to older women, and so they don't think that it's relevant, and so they don't think to go and find medical support. And then often when they go to find medical support, that doctor or medical professional isn't knowledgeable about menopause. It's only something that's really recently been added to general practitioners' training. And so, even though it impacts almost 50% of the population, it still isn't something that they necessarily think about. If somebody's experiencing, say, anxiety or joint pain, then it's often assumed to be something else. So yeah, there's big gaps in the learning. There's lots of research, lots of training that needs to happen to make sure that they don't, that people are understood when they go for support. I'd also say that 25% of women have quite an easy time of menopause. They may not notice that they have any symptoms. 50% of women experience symptoms that are obvious. They may need support from hormone replacement therapy. They may not. But 25% of women have a really dreadful time of menopause, and they really do need the support. But if they're surrounded by people who are in the 25% who aren't experiencing a difficult menopause, then their experiences can be shrugged off or dismissed.
Or they just feel like it's part of being a woman, that we just suffer a little bit all the time from an early age, from when our periods start till menopause, I guess. Where that's what my idea of it was like, oh, we just have periods and PMS and all that until I'm like in my 50s, and then it stops and you go through hot flashes. That was my idea. I didn't even really think about perimenopause until things started happening. I was like, what is going on? So
And it's often only when somebody starts hormone replacement therapy that they realize that their niggly knee doesn't hurt anymore, or they're not experiencing tinnitus in the same way as they were before, or their eyes aren't so dry. There's a lot of the signs that we just think are ourselves, just our little quirks, our physical quirks that we have that are difficult to manage or irritating. But then when we put it together in a package of understanding that these are all symptoms of depleted or fluctuating estrogen in our bodies, then it can start to make sense.
Yeah, I remember when I first started progesterone, it was shocking to me how hard I had been working for years leading up to that point, just trying to maintain some kind of regulation and balance, like exercising, diet, and with all of that, I felt pretty unsuccessful on some level. And then once I added the hormone replacement on top of those other things, I really felt like I got my life back and I got myself back. But I did not know that until looking back, because when you're in it, you're just doing the best you can and you think, well, this is what life is now. I guess this is what it is.
or I'm just weak and I can't handle life. I'm not capable of this. There's something wrong with me, that I'm not able to live in this world, and do all the things that everybody else seems to be doing just fine. Yeah.
I think that's one of the difficulties of the comparisons that we make against each other, and that stigma is that we think it's just us and we think everyone else is coping. And particularly when it comes to genitourinary syndromes in menopause, many women just don't admit to it. They don't share in their friendship group what they're experiencing. And so that can add to that feelings of individual problems, of that it's just you. Whereas if people reduce the stigma and talk more about it, then it becomes easier to get the treatment that you need.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's like if at 45 women's legs just all broke for some reason, and then nobody talked, everybody ignored it, that we were all walking around with broken legs. It's kind of crazy when you put it in perspective.
So, Helen, are there specific therapy approaches that are most effective for addressing the mental health challenges that are often associated with perimenopause and menopause?
Yes, there are. So while general talking therapy can be very helpful in terms of reducing stress levels and supporting women, cognitive behavioral therapy is seen by the international menopause societies as the gold standard evidence-based treatment for menopause, mainly for insomnia and hot flashes. But those are very debilitating for women during the menopause transition. And what CBT can do is help with psychoeducation so you can understand what's happening with your body, but also provide different scripts that you can be thinking to change the severity of the hot flash. And so it impacts you less, or perhaps really improve your sleep levels through sleep hygiene and changing how you approach sleep and feel about sleep if you're having sleep issues.
So, Helen, are there specific resources pertaining to hormone changes in perimenopause and menopause that you'd want to share with our listeners today?
Yes, the resource that I always want to share first is for those women and assigned female at birth experiencing premature ovarian insufficiency, which is the DAISY Network. It's a wonderful volunteer-led charity that has a wealth of information and resources if you are experiencing or you believe you might be experiencing POI. They have a Facebook group for support. They have Daisy Day to meet up and with other people experiencing POI. And it's an amazing place to find information if that's the things happening to you, because it's such a shock and it feels like you're alone, but you are not alone. I'd also recommend the Balance app. Balance is a website full of resources and information, and they have an app that you can track symptoms on. It's set up by Dr. Louise Newson, who's a menopause specialist in the UK and who has done incredible work in promoting women's research. She is an advocate of HRT, of hormone replacement therapy. And so some of it is very much geared towards that, but it is a great place for finding information and for tracking menopause symptoms. I'd also just recommend the information from your local menopause society. So there is the North American Menopause Society, the International Menopause Society, and I get a lot of information from the British Menopause Society because they really do have evidence-based treatments. They have world-renowned experts in obstetricians and gynecology, and they're a great place to find information that is truly evidence-based, because obviously there's not enough research yet, but it is happening and there are medical professionals who have an interest in this.
And Liz, I understand you also have some resources to share as well.
Yeah, MIDI Health was a great resource that really helped me. They're just a telehealth appointment, so that makes it really accessible. You don't have to go to a office. I often have my MIDI appointments and I just get in my car from work and drive around the corner and have them for, 15 minutes, a half hour. So that was really helpful to me, really accessible.
Thank you. Helen, do you have any takeaways you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
I think we've talked a lot about the downside of menopause, but there are upsides of menopause as well. And it's useful, I think, to think of it as a transition. It's the reverse of puberty. It's the body doing the other thing to stop being able to reproduce. And then there is a lot of life afterwards that we can have after the menopause transition has finished. And very few people do continue to experience symptoms. There are some symptoms that people continue to experience, like the genitourinary ones after the menopause transition, but most of them stop. And then we get our brains back and we feel better about ourselves, particularly for those people who aren't able to take hormone replacement therapy, because I know there might be listeners who aren't, who might have felt that we're talking a lot about hormone replacement therapy and it's not suitable for everybody. But things are going in the right direction. There is more research happening, and so there's no reason for people to be suffering from their menopause symptoms now.
Liz, what about you? Do you have any last thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I mean, yeah, that was kind of what Helen just said, was more along the lines of what I would want to leave listeners with, is looking at it more as like a shift. And yes, it's difficult. There's lots of struggles involved and a lot of unknowns and a lot of work that you have to do to get yourself to a better, more balanced space. But I think there's a lot of positives to it. It's an opportunity to center yourself in your life. It's an opportunity to make connections with your group of female friends, possibly with your mom or older people in your life that could pass down wisdom to you. And like the knowledge and the hope that it will end. Like there's another side to this. There's light at the end of the tunnel and all of that. And I found a lot of like joy in, like, it's going to sound silly, but silly posts on Instagram about perimenopause. And it's made me feel connected to people and connected to this age group of women, of people being like, you're in menopause when, and some silly, ridiculous thing happens. So it's like, we have to laugh about it. We have to have hope and hopefully more knowledge and more talking about it, but to see it more as a shift as opposed to an ending. It's a beginning of something else.
You've been listening to State of Mind, being human and living well.
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 I want to say a huge thank you to our guests, Helen Bennett and Liz Ryan, and to our In Your Voice contributor, Casey, and to you for joining us. What we've heard today reminds us that perimenopause and menopause aren't just medical events. They're huge life transitions. They affect our bodies, our moods, relationships, careers, priorities, and our sense of self. And while the path looks different for everyone, one thing is certain: no one should have to walk it alone. We hope today's conversation helps bring these conversations out of the shadows. By sharing openly and supporting one another, we break stigma and create room for change. That includes advocating for policies in healthcare and workplaces that recognize menopause and support women, so they don't have to choose between career and well-being. As you step back into your day, I hope you'll consider, what's one way I can make space for myself or for someone I care about who is going through this change? Even small acts of understanding can create big shifts in how we care for one another. If you liked today's show, you may also enjoy episode 81, Self-Care in Hard Times, Recipes for Resilience, featuring simple, powerful practices for staying grounded during overwhelming times. Episode 79, Aging with Resilience, Wisdom for Living Fully at Every Age, and Episode 77, Harnessing Awe, a simple and accessible mindfulness practice. Each offers practical tools and uplifting perspectives that complement what we discussed today. New episodes of State of Mind come out the first Sunday of every month, and you can find our full archive at stateofmindmedia.org. If you missed part of today's conversation or you just want to share it with someone, subscribe to the State of Mind podcast on any of the major platforms. And if this episode spoke to you, please could you take a moment to rate and review the show? Your feedback helps others find these conversations and the support they may need. We want to hear from listeners and community members just like you. Share your story by submitting an in your voice recording. Call in or record a short audio clip right on your phone about a mental health experience, a recovery insight, or a resource that's helped you. Submission details are at stateofmindmedia.org. Special thanks to our team, Yusuf Hassanein for audio production and marketing direction, Vijay Luca for audio production, Patrice Vecchione for In Your Voice story coaching, Tanmai Kadamani for transcriptions, Priscilla Yee and Grishma Jain for graphic design, Nimalan Elanchovan for marketing, Rumya Pondicherry, Melanie Dominguez, and Sarah Eisenberg for research, and thanks to musician Adrian Legg and Favored Nations Entertainment for our theme music. State of Mind was developed and originally broadcast in association with KSQD-FM in Santa Cruz, California. Join us again next month for another episode of State of Mind. Until then, live well.